All right, everybody. It says I'm live. So if that's actually true, let me know in the chat. Good to see you all. Welcome to another Monday night where we discuss things related to preparedness. And tonight's theme, of course, is about things that preppers got wrong about SHTF that we've been shown throughout 2023. And I thought this would be a good conversation for us to have just to make sure we're all on the same page as to what our expectations should be and what we might want to prepare for considering what we're learning right now. So, looks like I've got 22 WMR by 22 long rifle coming in from Rural 2 IC. So thank you for that. We've got 4.9 by 4.9 coming in from Grisio Nemo. And 6 Gun Miller says Tombstone is watching. What up to Baby Car? Good to see you. Glad everybody's here. Thank you all so much. Well, let's get this thing going. Zach Moan says 4.2069 by 4.2069, which I can assume means that you like to have a good time. And I like that about you. So, 2x4 over at Zeku. Love the hat. Robert P says so, and I appreciate it. I think it's a pretty solid hat. Welcome to what's likely to be the last live stream of the year, as next week is Christmas, and then the following Monday is 2024. So this is probably it for 2023, which is why I wanted to go over this information. So tonight, we're going to discuss two major SHTF events that we're witnessing in the world right now. We're going to discuss the first one because it's more recent and it's a little bit more, let's just call it dystopian in some ways. And then we're going to talk about the other one, which is much larger, but also much more modernized. And we can apply both of them to ourselves here in the United States as well in any other modernized Western country to kind of get an idea as what to expect. Now, while I'm waiting for everybody to get started, I want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest sponsor of the channel. And of course, I really appreciate them helping me move forward when it comes to preparedness and moving the channel forward as well. And then we also have Genesis Gold Group, who supports all the live streams here on the channel. And if you go to magicpreppergold.com, they can help you out when it comes to transferring your wealth over into stabilized assets like precious metals. So if you want to roll a retirement account into a gold-backed IRA or get precious metals delivered right to your door, check out magicpreppergold.com because it supports the channel, it helps me out, and it might help you out in the sense of getting some stabilized wealth for whatever comes next. So let's get right into it. Mike H., thank you so much for the super chat. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate everyone's support here, and please make sure you're doing what you can to prepare for yourself before you do anything to support me, just because we're all, feeling the struggle, and I definitely want to make sure that you are focusing on yourself first. So let's talk about the first most relevant SHTF event that's going on right now that we can pay attention to, and that's going to be what's happening in Gaza. Now, this is not a conversation about the politics or any of the issues surrounding the Israeli-Gaza conflict that's happening right now. This is just about how the inside of Gaza is looking and what you can expect if you're ever to find yourself in a similar situation. And this is the more dystopian example because Gaza itself was already in a level of desperation before this current conflict started to escalate. And it shows us how these more impoverished parts of the world are going to adapt to these situations. And I think we can apply what's happening to Gaza to some of our more impoverished urban areas if they were to find themselves in a similar SHTF style situation. And one of the things that I think preppers got wrong when it comes to SHTF as a concept in general is this idea that it's going to be like an immediate Mad Max or an immediate Book of Eli or some type of lone wanderer type scenario, Fallout 4, for example, right? But in reality, what we're seeing is what true SHTF is really probably going to be, and Gaza is a great example of that because they went from having at least some level of infrastructure, some level of technology, and some level of creature comfort to almost nothing in a very short amount of time. And then, of course, later on in the discussion, we're going to talk about things that have happened in Ukraine that we can learn from regarding the same misconceptions we might have had about SHTF, because it's a different type of country, a different level of modernization, more first world, of course, and their adaptation to their current situation is probably more along the lines of what we would see here in the United States, and especially in more of our rural areas where it's more spread out, but some of our urban areas as well. And I think this gives us a good overview as to what we should plan for and how we should kind of morph some of our standards or expectations based on these current scenarios. So, and I do see a lot of people in the chat trying to network. The Watchman, good to see you. I'm glad you're here. Separate Spectre, dang, we jumping right into the spiciness. Yes, we are. And that's what we're trying to do tonight. But I want everyone to be aware that these are lessons I think we should take away from these examples we're currently witnessing. And I do want to also say, I had someone recently say in a comment that this isn't SHTF, this is war. And I'm pretty sure if you ask the people who are suffering through these conflicts right now, whether or not they felt like they were in the middle of SHTF, I'm assuming they would say yes. So I don't know how much worse it has to get for someone for them to consider it SHTF, but I think people in Gaza and Ukraine right now probably feel like they're living through SHTF. But if you don't feel that way, I mean, let me know in the chat. But I'm just a little perplexed by that concept because war, in my opinion, is one of the worst case scenarios regarding SHTF, right? Other than like an asteroid strike or something of that catastrophic nature that could end the entire planet, a war is a pretty bad thing to have to live through, not to mention the consequences it could have globally regarding nuclear warheads and everything else that could be used at any point in time. So, let's see here. And Hugh Junnett said, you're in Oregon, land of the liberals in the north, land of the patriots in the south. All right, well, if you become Greater Idaho, I guess we'll be rooting for you there, but we'll see what happens because I'm not sure if those things ever work out. Just ask the state of Jefferson. Gaza Strip in maps how life has changed in 2 months. So the reason we're looking at this is because it's only been 2 months and things have changed drastically there very quickly and have moved from at least some level of functionality to a straight up third world, and in some cases even less than third world country. So, some things I want to talk about that we were wrong about, okay? First off, we could go through these maps and everything, but there's only a few things that are relevant to that in this conversation. You can see here with this map that we have the evacuation zones, which are massive. We have the Israeli ground operations occurring within the evacuation zones. And then you see just how small the refugee camp zones actually are in comparison to these huge swaths of land that have been considered to be evacuation zones. So do the math, and do you think the amount of people who are in that much space could fit into those tiny gray spaces now? That's a consideration to make. Here's what I really want to get in on this one. There's been a big movement in the preparedness community to say, look, we understand the purpose of things like, bug out bags and stuff like that, but bugging in is the best option, which I agree with because it is. But there's a lot of people out there saying that you don't need a bug out bag or having something like that is a waste of time or money or effort. I disagree with that. Is bugging in my number one goal? Yeah, of course. I mean, I've got some property and I've got a house that's pretty well set up. I don't want to leave if I don't have to. But you know what? I can understand the nuance of possibly having to leave regardless of how I feel about it. And I think this should remind everybody that you might just get displaced. It might not be up to you, especially if there's a military force or something with more power than you can project telling you have to leave. I mean, at what point are you going to make a move, right? So just so you know, on October 7th is when the attack from Hamas on Israel occurred. On October 8th, there was 123,000 people displaced in Gaza. By the 12th, there was 423,000. By the 13th, Israel orders an evacuation. By the 16th, there was 1 million people displaced. So it took basically a week for 1 million people to suddenly have to go somewhere else. And by the 4th of December, 1.9 million people have been displaced in Gaza since October 7th. So 2 million people are displaced now, which I believe is around 80% of the population, or maybe even more. That's a lot of people who had to pick up and leave their home suddenly, and also who are now somewhere else, right? So I think we were probably right about the idea of like the roaming horde or the golden horde or these groups of people that are suddenly going to have to figure out where else to be. But I also think that we need to be flexible in our preparedness plans to say we might have to leave, no matter how well prepared we are, no matter how reinforced our home is and how fortified everything is and how much of a stock of supplies and everything else we have. These people probably didn't want to leave, and they absolutely had to. So this is a reminder that that is something that some preppers can definitely get wrong. I'm not saying all of us got this one wrong, but I think there is this kind of like new push to say bugging out's dumb, you got to stay home, it's the best place for you to be. I get that. I agree with that being the best option, but I think you have to have a bug out option in place because of these types of situations. Now, okay, we're going to move down here. You can just see how huge the amount of defenses is in comparison to where they're being forced to leave from to where they're heading. But one thing I wanted to show here, which is the thumbnail of the night, okay? So this is the same beach a year apart, basically. The lower image looks like something out of an apocalyptic movie. Like it looks like that movie, Battle Los Angeles, right? Which is a movie. It's a movie, but it looks like that movie. Like you can see all the damage and the buildings and the infrastructure. The beach is completely destroyed. Nothing is the way it looked before. And the speed of which this happened is something that I think we can get wrong as well. We expect everything to be the slow boil because that's what we're currently experiencing. But it doesn't take much other than a very catalytic event to suddenly push us into what that bottom image looks like. And I think that's something that we should definitely keep in mind, how quickly Gaza went from the photo above to the photo below within a month's time. So October 7th was the attack. That photo's from November 2023. It just goes to show you that, we're pretty safe here in the United States. I'm not going to argue that point. Of course, we have a lot better of a situation here than what they were dealing with in Gaza by any means, right? But we also need to be aware of the fact that it doesn't take a lot for these sudden changes to occur. And if somebody has the will and the might to do it, they're going to be able to do it if they decide to. I don't have the capability of deterring the Israeli defensive forces away from my front door, so I can understand why this could possibly happen. So, let's be aware of this. Now, here's another thing to keep in mind, okay? A 7-day ceasefire at the end of November allowed agencies to deliver an average of 170 trucks and 110,000 liters of fuel a day. But that has since fallen to about 100 trucks and 70,000 liters of fuel. The UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says it's too little, way too little, the WHO's Dr. Rick Peppercorn said. I would have preferred it to say peppercorn, but here we are. So, something I want to bring up about that is that even though they're in a straight-up conflict zone, it's a war zone, even though their entire city is destroyed in many ways, the international community is still trying to supply aid and still supplying fuel in order to keep things up and running. Now, in a full-blown SHTF worldwide event, that's going to be a different situation. But when we're talking about what's most likely, especially now based on global politics and everything else that's happening, I think there should be a level of expectation that there will be some level of aid, no matter how prevalent it is or how, scarce it might be. I think you should at least anticipate there will be some. Somebody's going to provide aid for some reason or another. The UN has a vested interest in maintaining the appearance of humanitarianism, right? But if we were to have, let's say, there's this movie coming out by A24 called Civil War. I don't know if you've even heard of it. But all I'm saying is if something like that were to happen here, I would assume global powers would be here very quickly with aid in order to gain whatever type of trust they might be able to during that time. I would expect Chinese rations to head our way, and I would expect water coming from Mexico, the kind that makes you really have to go to the bathroom, and I would expect Russia to even start dropping stuff off. So just keep that in mind, because I'm not saying that we should rely on aid by any means. It's not my plan at all. But what I'm trying to say is that there will be something being put into place most likely. Like I said, unless it's like a world-ending event, but people are going to try to provide some level of aid, which means the people that are displaced might have either somewhere to go, aka where the aid is, or at the very least have a little less desperation than what might turn them into complete chaos, right? So those are things that I want to discuss regarding that article, and we're going to move on here. Razor wire, no global power will be here with rules, mandates, and punishments. Well, exactly, but everything has to have its level of scarcity based on landmass, right? So it's all depending on location and everything else, but I agree that there will be some level of power here regardless of whatever vacuum is left behind, all right? So what else can we learn from what's happening in Gaza right now? Well, they are dealing with the crisis of starvation. Okay, so I know I just said aid trucks are trying to get in. We saw that those numbers are falling quickly, and one of their biggest concerns right now is starvation, winter chill, and disease, in all honesty. Well, here's one thing that we might get wrong on a regular basis, and something I really want everyone to consider and keep in mind, okay? This is where it really kind of struck with me here. Forcibly displaced Palestinians could not flee with winter clothes. So this goes back to the idea of like a bug-out bag, or at least something packed and ready to go at minimum with comfort items like clothing and blankets and ways that you can sleep somewhere other than where you currently are. But this also goes into another portion of that I want to get into here in just a minute. But first, let's discuss this really quick. Islam Saeed Muhammad Barakat did not have time to gather the belongings his family needs for the winter when they fled their home in Gaza City. I feel some anxiety because we do not have enough blankets and warm clothes, he said. Barakat, 48, a displaced civilian in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, in messages relayed to CNN by Walid Mohammed Nazal, an NGO worker based in Ramallah. The average temperature in Gaza falls between 10 and 20 degrees, so we're talking 50 to 68 in December. Like, that's not very cold, but I guess compared to what they're used to, it might be cold enough where if you're out in the elements, it could still cause you a lot of problems. I mean, sleep outside in 50 degrees without a blanket or warm clothes and tell me that it's going to be okay, right? So, The rainy season typically lasts from November to February, with January the wettest month. One reporting station near the border of southern Gaza and Israel indicated nearly twice the amount of average rainfall to date, while other surrounding reporting stations to the north showed less rain than normal. So environmentals are a big issue. These people are exposed to the environment, right? And exposure kills you in a survival situation. And they did not have enough time to get warm clothes or blankets while they were rushed out the door being forcibly displaced. And that should remind you that if you are ever in that situation, and forcible displacement can happen for a lot of reasons. It doesn't require the military knocking on your door and kicking you out of your home and telling you where to go. It could be a wildfire, it could be a tornado, it could be a myriad of other natural disasters that forces you to not be able to get the supplies that you need. So, for example, you're at work. There's let's just say an earthquake, right? It destroys the transit or the infrastructure for you to be able to get home, right? Whatever interstate or whatever highway you take to get home, you're not able to right now, or who knows what, right? So because of that, you're stuck away from home. Do you have anything with you in the sense of like a blanket or a jacket or something like that? These are all things you should definitely consider, but this is a reminder that you don't always have time to grab things if they're not ready to go in a place that you can easily access. Let's see here. 50 degrees is freaking t-shirt weather, says Viv B. Exactly, but maybe not for the people who are out there, especially if it's raining and they're saying it's a very wet season and, you know, they got children and everything else. 50 degrees and wet is not the same as 50 degrees and dry. So these are just things to keep in mind, but it's just a reminder that they had to literally jump into a new situation without even proper clothing, okay? So now I want to take a look at this really quickly. This is something that I want to touch base on. Seeking shelter from the rain. Shadi Bleha has no roof to protect himself from the worsening weather. Instead, he is sheltering in the courtyard of a school. We are staying in a tent made from separate pieces of nylon, the 20-year-old student displaced from northern Gaza to Rafah told CNN. Bleha said he was living inside the makeshift tent with at least 23 relatives, including 5 children aged 5 to 12. On some nights, he sleeps outside next to a fire because there's not enough room for them all, he said. We try to play some games with my family and sing together to make them happy, at least for a small time. Okay, this is a reminder. So, first off, there's a good chance a lot of these people don't own vehicles, right? It's an impoverished area. But even if they did, there's a good chance they weren't allowed to just drive down the street to get wherever they had to go. There was a military effort occurring in their area. They were forced out of their homes and forced to move to a different location. And now they're stuck without any form of shelter that can keep them out of the rain. So they're using whatever they can cobble together. And I mean, if you look at this picture right here, you have an umbrella with basically plastic sheeting wrapping around it. You have plastic sheeting wrapped around some kind of an overhang over here as well. Almost looks like a bus station stop or something like that. But here's the thing. This is a common, I guess, missing item, I would say, in some people's bug out plan, right? A lot of people like to use things like bivvies, or they even don't have like any real shelter besides maybe like a ranger roll or something like that set up because it's lightweight and it's not cumbersome. But at the same time, if you don't get where you're planning on going, because maybe your bug out location has a shelter, maybe you have a shed or a shack or a cabin, or maybe where you're going is like more of a communal place where you have multiple structures and you're sharing a space with other families, whatever your plan is, you also have to plan for the idea that you might not make it there. And if you're forced to go somewhere like a refugee zone because there's some guys who are armed and forcing you to go where they want you to go, or else you're going to have a very bad day, then you have to keep in mind that what you have on your body might be all you have. This is one of the few reasons why I carry a tent in my bug out bag. I know it sounds crazy and a lot of people get on me for it, but I also have a family, right? So I'm not going to bug out alone, which means a bivvy is only good enough for me to use. And I don't want me and my wife and kids to all be in separate bivvies laying in on the ground in the middle of who knows where, getting rained on or whatnot, right? And not having any type of physical shelter with some level of privacy, somewhere to store some things, somewhere to get changed with your clothes, somewhere to stay warm or be together out of the elements, right? And so I think one thing we get wrong is the idea of not having your own shelter, not being able to provide your own shelter. Having an expedient shelter makes sense, especially in the sense of like the tactical realm, like getting out there and doing like a recon mission or something. Yeah, that's where I'm going to have like a ranger role in my backpack because I'm not trying to set up camp. But if I found myself in a situation like these people are currently in, I want a structure of some sort, not just a makeshift structure and not just a bivy sack. I want something that I can literally get inside of with my family if need be, which is one of the reasons why I carry a tent. It's a small tent because it has to be weight conscious, right? So my tent's 5 pounds, but it's still a decent sized tent. It's all weather, so it's good enough for all 4 seasons, even though it's not necessarily specifically designed to be a 4-season tent. But it also has the benefit of being able to fit 6 people inside if they're all sitting instead of laying down. So consider this. I just want you to keep it in mind. These people are literally trying to figure out how to stay out of the rain because of how tight these shelters are. And one thing that Gaza is teaching us right now too is that there are not enough shelters. There are not enough buildings. There's not enough places to go in an evacuation or an emergency of that size. If an entire city gets evacuated 20 minutes from your small town, guess what? Every building in your small town is now filled. Your high school gym is filled up, the library's filled up, the community center's filled up, whatever empty office building was down the street is filled up. And where are you going to go if you end up having to leave your home for whatever reason, right? So all these things have to be considered, and it's one of the few reasons I have an actual shelter in my backpack. But I know a lot of people think that's crazy because of the weight, but I think it's something that might be very important if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. So let's see here. Rob Sinelli says, I will sleep in a pile of leaves. And I would say, not in North Dakota, you won't. First off, there are no leaves. And second off, it's way too cold. But seriously, there are definitely some interesting things out there that you would want to consider regarding your options. Because just because it's a survivable area that you're in, having somewhere to be, something to call your own in these types of situations can be very important and very pivotal, especially to morale, especially if you're not alone. If you're with a family or you have children with you, you can't expect everybody to be okay with like sleeping in a bag by themselves, sprawled out on the ground, right? Like that's just, in my opinion, reality. But anyway, okay, let's talk about what else they have going on. The starvation factor. This has only been going on for 2 months and people are starving. Now look, like I said, Gaza was an impoverished area before all this started, but did they already have a humanitarian crisis there? Yes, they did. Did it get much worse? 100%. And now they're literally already on the verge of a famine, even though it's only been 2 months. So think about anywhere in your area, anywhere in your city, anywhere in your local region where you have an impoverished area, right? We know what neighborhoods tend to have less access, for example, okay? Now, if those people are already struggling to get food on the table, and something like this happens, according to Gaza at least, it might only be a month or 2 before it really sets in to where even humanitarian aid can't get there and can't supply enough to actually keep people from getting into the part of their starvation cycle where they're finally getting that desperate to do something crazy. So this is just a reminder that can happen very, very fast, okay? The price of food and water has surged as supplies diminished, leading to widespread hunger and dehydration. The World Food Program declared a catastrophic hunger crisis in Gaza on December 5th. The relief organization said it was forced to shut down its last remaining bakery because it had no fuel or gas, adding that it ran 23 bakeries before the war. See, this happens fast and it's cascading. And so at any point in time, you're going to find yourself unable to access more food, which we all know. But one thing we get wrong is kind of like that timeline. We always talk about the 72 hours of a grocery store, right? Your grocery store only has 72 hours worth of food without that just-in-time delivery system, right? But if we don't consider humanitarian aid or any of these other efforts that would likely be taking place, maybe that timeline takes a little bit longer. But regardless, 2 months is still not very long to get to that point of everything breaking. And that's exactly what we're kind of seeing here right now. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that disease is spreading like wildfire there, and it's for the same reason that everything else might require you having your own separate shelter of some kind, right? Because all these people are suddenly being stuffed into these makeshift shelters. For those already struggling to stay safe, warm, and fed, illness poses an additional risk, okay? Now, this isn't necessarily something we get wrong as preppers, but it's something that I want to try to change some of the stigma about. When I say that, what I mean is because of 2020 and what happened throughout 2020, there's a new kind of stigma against like being hypersensitive to illness, let's just say, right? Well, maybe we should just accept that we need to be more aware of it and more hypersensitive to it if a situation like this were to occur. That way you can avoid some of the dangers of getting sick during these trivial times where you need to maintain your health as best as possible. And some of those practices when it comes to, I don't know, washing your hands or keeping your distance or whatever, might actually be viable during this type of an event. In crowded shelters that cannot meet basic sanitation and hygiene needs, diseases spread like wildfire. She anticipates an uptick in upper respiratory tract infections because coughs, cold, and viruses spread more quickly when people are clustered together without proper ventilation. Civilians will be exposed to other illnesses, including diarrhea, hepatitis A, and as well as body lice and scabies because they cannot wash properly, Inglis said. Roughly 160,000 to 165,000 cases of diarrhea have been recorded among children under the age of 5. That's deadly. That's fatal. So one of the things I wanted to bring up from that part of the conversation that we get wrong sometimes is just how important hygiene is going to be, but not just hygiene, but human waste, right? If people are getting diarrhea to that scale during this crisis, and you don't have the preparations to either avoid it or medicate for it or to deal with the aftermath of it, aka do you have the supplies to be able to clean yourself or clean your children or whatever it may be when they're dealing with such a sickness, like those things need to be part of the plan. That's why I've started integrating, anti-diarrheal medication in every kit that I have. At least from my understanding, I was told this by people who do stuff that I've never done before. Diarrhea takes people out of the fight like immediately, and it happens all of the time. Anytime there's any conflict, somebody's got diarrhea, right? So anti-diarrhea, put it in all of your kit. And this is where preppers get things wrong sometimes. You don't see anti-diarrhea in everybody's kit. When I say that, I don't is it in your first aid kit? Is it in your bug out bag? Is it in your chest rig? Is it in anything that you might be using depending on the SHTF scenario? Should probably have some level of anti-diarrheal in that kit. And then ways to keep yourself clean and well maintained thereafter, aka, do you have baby wipes? Do you have wet wipes? Do you have anything that's going to make sure that you don't find yourself regretting not having those things? So keep that in mind. And I only say that because I have seen just some kits and stuff. I watch a lot of other preparedness channels because, I don't know everything, so I'm trying to learn as well. And I do see people sometimes present their kit or their bug out bag or their loadout, and not once is anti-diarrheals mentioned, or not once is a form of wet wipes or anything like that mentioned. And I think it's pretty important, okay? One thing else I want to mention is that I didn't used to have anti-diarrheals in my kit. I do now, but I had to learn that. So that's why I want to share that with you and let you all know about it. Dr. Alton has a recent video update on fish antibiotic availability. There are some companies that got in trouble for selling them, so I would say not now, says Oki Khan. So that's just something that you might want to keep in mind because I guess everyone's discussing that here in the chat. And that's unfortunately a lot of our secondary modes of acquiring certain medications and stuff are under attack because the giant pharmaceutical industry wants to regulate everything, right? Let's see. Red Dawn Ready Preparedness says that's what guns are for, to secure shelter. Doesn't always work the way you want it to, right? So sometimes your shelter is the one that's getting secured. Ask the cartel how I know that. So it's not that I have a friend with a ranch in Mexico who no longer has a ranch in Mexico, even though they still have the title and the deed to it. Let's go ahead and move forward with here's. So I can't play the sound on this just because of YouTube stuff, right? But I do want to. Oh, let's see. Ian says, "Be careful with Pepto. The bismuth makes your poo black and can mask an intestinal bleed." All right, well, good to know. I didn't know that, so thanks for that. And I just generally use basically Imodium AD as my anti-diarrheal. So, if that floats your boat, there you go. That's the good stuff, I guess. So this is a reminder. Here's something from Gaza. And this isn't there's nothing violent or anything like that, so you don't have to be concerned about that. But what I'm trying to show and demonstrate here is that we as preppers, sometimes we get this whole food ration thing wrong, right? I see a lot of stuff like, hey, if there's rations and people are lining up to go get the rations, like the bread lines of the Great Depression, then we need to be there so that way you don't give away your OPSEC, because if you're not in the bread line, then people will assume you have what you need already and then they might come looking for you. And there's that kind of like concept that's been discussed a lot, which I generally agree with. But if things get to the level of desperation we're seeing in a place like Gaza, that doesn't apply the same way, at least in my opinion. And these food rationing distribution areas are actually what seem to be more dangerous than they are safe, to the point where avoiding them would probably be better than possibly giving up your OPSEC in order to not be there, right? Like, oh, well, if I'm not there, they'll think, I have stuff. Well, in all honesty, you might not want to be here because it looks like it could get dangerous really easily. So just take a look at what was going on here during this distribution of, necessities while everything was being given out here in Gaza. And like, you could be there, I guess, if you want, and line up and wait for your ration, so that way everyone else thinks, yeah, I saw a Magic Prepper there, so I know he needs food too. I don't have to go rob him now. But I don't think this is somewhere I'd want to be. And if these events look like a food truck going through Chicago right now, if we were in the same exact scenario in Chicago, I have a feeling would probably be a very similar event. I don't think it would go very cordially. I think the fact that people are already looting FedEx trucks in major cities right now means that if it was a food truck that they were starving for, would likely be looted very easily. So keep that in mind, okay? That's another thing that I think we get wrong sometimes, is that that everyone's going to maintain some level of cohesion, like we're even going to wait in the line. Based on what I see these days coming from our metropolitan areas and from the younger generation who's disassociated with our society in many ways, I don't think that we're going to see bread lines. I think we're going to see what I just showed you that's happening in Gaza when the ration truck shows up. So Rob Sinelli says, I like how the truck doesn't stop. Yeah, well, I mean, it's just, I don't know if they were even supposed to be there, if that's where the distribution was supposed to start happening. I don't know if people just jumped on the truck and started getting at it, even though he was on his way to the distribution point. But it is one of those things, Living Free says, that video wasn't New York City. No, surprise, it wasn't actually. But eventually, I think it probably will be, which is really unfortunate to say, because it used to be quite an iconic place. But, there are still good people out there in places like New York City that could possibly pull it together. But the longer things dilapidate, the harder they are to rebuild, right? And I think in many places in our country now, we have gotten to that point where I don't know if they can come back, in all honesty. And I don't like saying that, to be honest. How honest can I be? Let's just keep talking about honesty. So, Suction Cup Man says, I stopped eating, so I don't need food. I like your character arc. Suction Cup Man could definitely have some good abilities that could be useful in a crisis. And I also would love to know your superhero rating based on the One Punch Man method. So let me know. All right, moving on. Here's a good one. Okay, something preppers get wrong that we're seeing happening in Gaza right now. Okay. And here's going to be like the difference. When we jump to Ukraine, we're going to actually see like how this isn't the same there. So expect this in places that are already impoverished and already hard to get resupply, and then change the dynamic based on your area when we jump to Ukraine. But if we're in the middle of a metropolitan area with a population that's too big to support, and supplies like fuel and things run out quickly, alternative transportation is going to be important. But that alternative transportation has to be reasonable in the sense of practicality and capability. And in Gaza, they said, we're going to straight animal-drawn carts, okay? Carts have become the main mode of transport for civilians to move around areas in search of food, daily necessities, or to flee Israeli bombardment. Now, this tells us a couple things, all right? People are leaving on foot. We know that. Bug out bag, good thing to have. And we're going to talk about that because it's happening in Ukraine too. But this also shows that in a lot of situations, you might at least have some alternate mode of transportation. And if it is, an animal-drawn carriage or something of that nature, you can get a lot more stuff on a cart than you can on your back. And so this is also something you might want to prepare for or consider, because even though you might not have access to something like an animal-drawn cart, you better believe other people will, and they will be using it as well. And it's something that you want to keep in mind based on the fact that if fuel runs out, there still will be some sort of transportation. And I think transportation is going to be a part of the game no matter what ends up happening in the long haul. And we're seeing that in Ukraine big time, which we'll jump to here in a minute. But in Gaza, we're even seeing it where you wouldn't have thought that this would be a normal sight, but here we are. And the adaptation of impoverished areas and people who have dealt with more adversity regarding their conditions tend to jump into these types of solutions very quickly and adapt more quickly. And that's another thing that we get wrong sometimes, that as preppers, we're going to rise to the occasion, right? We're going to, once SHTF happens, I'll just make it work. Well, are you going to be able to put together an animal-drawn cart once all the fuel runs out? Or you're just going to have enough fuel to last you forever? Well, I have a feeling that's going to be hard to pull off because fuel is hard to store in some ways, and not everybody can just create a gasifier and do whatever they got to do to keep it rolling, right? So in impoverished areas, people get crafty and things like this occur. So your adaptability might not be at the level of somebody who has much less than you because they're doing it every day. And so I think one thing we definitely get wrong is the idea we're going to rise to the occasion when we have these kind of comfortable, in very many ways spoiled lifestyles where we get to be lazy about a lot of things, right? These people aren't lazy in general. They have to do a lot just to get through each day, and they're already riding animal-drawn carts, okay? Just a few weeks ago, carts drawn by donkeys and horses were a rare sight in the Gaza Strip. Sellers of produce and other products would roam the streets, usually teeming with cars in search of customers. Okay? But as the Israeli military wreaked destruction across Gaza and besieged an already blockaded territory, a suffocating lack of fuel has made it impossible for people to move around the strip in their cars. People have suddenly found themselves forced to rely on animal-led carts as the main means of transport. On one of the usually busier streets of Deir al-Balah in the central Gaza Strip, cars are rarely spotted. Instead, dozens of carts are seen carrying residents and displaced people. Okay? Since the start of its large-scale war, Israel has cut fuel and gas supplies to the enclave, rendering the vast majority of cars unusable in the 7th week of the attack. So think EMP, right? It's almost the same outcome. If no cars are moving, what happens next? Day after day, more car owners run out of fuel and cannot find any other means of transportation. These carts are dragged by animals since they do not need fuel or gas. This has become an important way for us to overcome the current situation. An owner of a cart and a horse told Middle East Eye. So I'm not going to lie. Don't be surprised if you see Magic Prepper come next year with a donkey. Because first off, they will mess up coyotes. Don't get me wrong on that one. But second off, because I need some livestock guardianship if I'm going to have my goat herd, which is another plan of mine. Look, I'm trying to, embrace my Star Wars Rebel arc, I guess, right? So anyway, Kevin Grip, thanks for joining as a member. I'll talk to you about that in just one second here. But in reality, transportation is still going to exist. Even if it is animal drawn, even if it's obscure or alternative, even if it's e-bikes, even if it's things that you don't assume would be overly useful, even if it's just a regular bicycle, right? But transportation is huge because it keeps you moving forward. And if that is what we can do in the sense of planning ahead for it, you need to plan that there will be transportation, aka you can probably bring more with you than you might expect if you plan for that transportation to exist. And secondly, if everyone else has transportation, it means they can move further, faster, and get to you much easier with more people and supplies. So if for example, a donkey-drawn cart with 6 military-aged males who are well-armed can get to you from the next city over within a day, right? That's a huge thing you have to prepare for. Because if they're out looking for supplies and that's their goal, well, these vehicles can move these larger groups of people into your area faster, which means they can acquire more before they leave, which means they can stay for longer if they need to, and it also means they can bring more people with them to do the thing they have to do that you might not be able to have access to because you and your people don't have alternative modes of transportation. So just one thing we tend to get wrong is that everyone leaving the city will be on foot or something if something like an EMP happens. And I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we're going to find ourselves with some very crafty people figuring out very crafty ways to get to wherever they need to go in order to get more supplies, more food, and become raiders, right? I don't know what else to say. So, Magic Donkey in the works for 2024. But it does not represent my political affiliation. It's just unfortunate that an elephant is not something I can afford right now. So, not that I'm a Republican per se, but I'm definitely not a donkey. Anyway, Rob Sinelli, remember Doomsday Preppers guy made a PVC rickshaw. Those guys all made a lot of things, and some of them were legit, and some of them would get you jail time. So there's that. All right, Kevin Grip, gifted 5 memberships. I really appreciate that. And also, by becoming a member, we do have the members only live stream tonight. It's at 9:45 Central Standard Time. It's members only. There is a link on the community page on my channel if you want to check that out. It's just to hang out, chat about things. It's kind of like a debrief of the live stream tonight, but also just casual conversation. And if you want to join the Subscribe Star, I just put that in the live chat. That's another way you can get into the members only chat. It's $5 a month. You get exclusive content, you get direct communication, you get the live chats, and I do a preparedness incentive. And December's preparedness incentive is going to be a big one because it's the end of the year, it's going to be Christmas, and I'm going to take care of somebody very well. And a lot of that's supported directly by Midway USA. So awesome, awesome, awesome. Now, let's keep moving, okay? One thing I think we do get right, but maybe not with a full thought process, is during an SHTF event, the amount of people who might just be living their day-to-day life is very dependent on location. So in Gaza, where we have an impoverished, more desperate society, it kind of immediately went to nobody's going to work or school, right? And so we'll see that contrasted by Ukraine. And so this is something you can apply to where you live, or like, I guess, what kind of an area you're in. Because if you're in a overly urbanized area that suddenly becomes a war-torn conflict zone, it's likely nobody's going to work right away, even though that's not the case in Kiev, right? But what I can say is that Gaza's telling us right here about what percentage we should expect regarding that, okay? So let's see here. I'm kind of jumping down here so I can give you that information, and sometimes I lose track of these things. It's not a big deal. We can make it work. Where did I get it? This is the problem when I try to get everything figured out here. All right, so here we go. There are hundreds of staff who, like their students, will never come back to classrooms. At least 200 teachers have been killed and more than 500 injured. Survivors are scattered. More than 80% of the population has been displaced and in no state to work or learn. They are hungry, thirsty, and cold with little access to electricity or internet. My friends from school, from my boxing club, and my English language club have all fled Gaza City, and communication is hard because there's so little internet connection, said Mohammed, whose home is in an area where Israeli troops are fighting ground battles with Hamas militants. So, just as a reminder, at this level of SHTF, there's no school, there's no work, right? And I think that's what we assume a lot of times. But there's no one to start it back up either. And I think that might be something we're wrong about once in a while. We have this thought process sometimes that SHTF happens, but then, we're going to rebuild society, which is the goal after an SHTF event, is to kind of reconstruct and get back to where we need to be, right? But what they're talking about here is like, they don't know how are they even going to have school ever again? Like, this is a huge amount of teachers who are gone. These are a huge amount of students who are not learning now. By mid-December, okay, so a month, or like I said, 2 months after this happened, 352 school buildings have been damaged, more than 70% of the enclave's education infrastructure. Many of those still standing have become shelters, including more than 150 UNWRA schools and about 130 schools run by local authorities. They cannot, of course, hold any kind of lesson when the shelters are already overcrowded. So, school, work, if you're at the level of SHTF that Gaza is currently in, it's not happening. It's just not happening. So, and how do you get it back up and running? I don't know. But that's where they're at right now. So those are the things that I think we can get wrong based on some of the information coming out of Gaza, right? There's a lot of little tidbits that we can take from these conflicts and apply it to our situation and say, okay, if we see something similar here, what are my expectations? Or if we even get something, similar in another part of the world, what should we expect them to have to go through? Now, we're going to go into Ukraine. Why are we doing that? Different type of country, different size of country, different economy, different just way of living, right? More of a first world type country versus more of a third world type situation. It's just, everything's a little different. So we can kind of see there's two different things that we're going to contrast. One is how technology and infrastructure and the dependence on it kind of prioritizes some of the direction of this SHTF scenario for the people of Ukraine. And two, that exact situation of having the technology and the comforts and everything else that come with it doesn't really allow for that same level of adaptation that we're seeing in Gaza, right? Between animal-drawn carts and just the way that they're dealing with, the work school, shelters, entire scenario is just completely different. Even just the way they're dealing with like the rationing trucks and stuff like that. So this gives us two examples to kind of consider when we're planning for any of these types of scenarios. Let's see here. Oki Khan says, meanwhile, Gates and Schwab are living well. Well, of course they are. They're always living well. I had a Maverick 88 for 11 years, says Pepe D's Nuts. And guess what? If someone asked me right now, what's the cheapest firearm that you would bet your life on? It'd be a Maverick 88. So if you guys are on a budget and like maybe don't even have a firearm, but you're thinking about like, whoa, what would be a good idea? Maverick 88 is the cheapest gun that I think is actually like something you'll keep forever. Like that's how good they are for the price. But that's just my 2 cents. You guys let me know what you think about that. Anyway, I think I just found a new video topic to work on for 2024. Thanks, Pepe D's Nuts. I guess I'll have to remember that name now. Let's move forward. What's going on in Ukraine? Well, here's one thing. Let's get back to demonstrating that you might have to go on foot, even when vehicles are there. And this is where I hear this argument a lot, okay? Well, if I have to leave, I'm bringing my truck. And if I can't bring my truck, I'm not going to leave, right? Okay, I understand that thought process, don't get me wrong. But these people are leaving in vehicles, but then they literally have to walk through a certain part or else they're not going to get where they're going. So what does that mean? Well, one, it means you might have your vehicle, which means you can have a lot of stuff, but you might have yourself suddenly finding out that you have to leave that vehicle behind. If that happens, do you have the ability to keep some of that stuff with you, or did you solely place all your faith in having your vehicle? So what I'm referring to here is you have a vehicle full of supplies, but you don't have a bug-out bag or a rucksack or something that you can carry those supplies in as well. So this is where having a bug-out bag is still important. Even if your plans are to have your vehicle or have something larger or an animal-drawn cart, whatever it might be, you still need the bag. Like I think, like, I understand the resistance to the concept these days. I really do, because the reason this is happening is because people are so bought into the bug-out bag as the main priority or the main plan. People thought SHTF means I'm going to walk out my front door into the wilderness with my bug-out bag and never be seen again, right? That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. And that idea is a bad idea. But I don't think we have that idea anymore, right? Like, we're smart enough to understand the nuance of a bug-out bag and why it's important, even if it shouldn't be our first top priority. So let me tell you about this. Life in Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine is grim. People are fleeing through a dangerous corridor. And this is from December 11th this year. Like, this isn't like old news. Like, this is what they're dealing with right now, because it's pretty much the only way to get from Russian-controlled territory back into Ukraine that's available. So that same video display, hey, look at that. Who knew? All right. Sumy, Ukraine. Whenever 52-year-old Anna is agitated, she senses a chilling touch of a gun barrel between her brows, a haunting reminder of an encounter with a group of Russian soldiers on her street about a year ago. All right, there's your anecdotal evidence. Anyway, okay. Oh, trying to get to the part that actually is about this whole situation. Here we go. Allowed to move freely through Russian-controlled zones. Most take buses to the corridor from homes throughout the country. Zaporizhia and Kherson in the southeast, Donetsk and Luhansk in the northeast, and Crimea, the southern peninsula that Russia annexed in 2014. Once they get to the corridor, they must proceed on foot. Tripsing? I guess that's what it is. For some reason, my brain wanted to say trapezing, because that just sounds a lot more interesting. Tripsing through an open, treeless no man's land, the whir of artillery and the whine of drones from nearby battles echoing in their ears. They are warned before they go that no one will be able to guarantee their safety as they cross. Some travel with children or elderly parents, okay? And here's a little map that shows you where this corridor is that they're having to walk to. So they're taking, gas-operated vehicles, buses, to these areas, and they still have to get on foot to make the final part of the journey. So this is just a reminder that this can be a necessity depending on how things turn out. And this is 2 years into this conflict, and people are still having to get out of their car, get out of their bus, and walk the rest of the way. So plan for this possibility. I'm not saying it should be your plan to do this. I'm saying that you should be ready to adapt to that possibility as being a necessity. All right? Now, let's see here. Wild Weasel. Yeah, I stopped putting my bug out bag in my car. I keep an IFAC extra food water along the day pack now. Too many people break into cars if they see a big pack. And that can be a problem. So, but obviously, you have a get home bag to get back to wherever you need to go if you have your vehicle with you. That's a good idea. But if you are actually bugging out of your home and getting into your vehicle to leave, then that's an opportunity for you to grab the bug out bag and put it in the vehicle, right? So it doesn't have to live in your car. I agree with that. But you should have the ability to have it with you if that's what it calls for, okay? Let's see here. Flyover State, Camden County, Missouri. Checking in. If you guys want to check in, make sure you do. Try to network the best you can. I think trying to interact with other people is very important, especially at this time in our lives when everything's getting a little bit crazy out there. So if you want to join the Discord, I will go ahead and get you a quick link here for it. And that's just so you guys can come hang out and, talk to some of our friendly edgelords. That way you can get all the information you want and everything else you didn't want at the same time. But no, for real, it's a good place to network. I have different channels for different states. I have different channels for different countries. All types of topics and everything else are covered. And we do have some interesting banter. So come check it out if that's something you're trying to do in the sense of networking. I think it's a good idea. Joseph Poniatowski, Alan, because they won't listen. I don't know what you're talking about, but now you know, Alan, exactly. So what else is something we get wrong? Well, let's just reiterate this one. You might have to leave your home because it might not exist anymore, right? We talk about leaving our home as if we're going to walk out the front door, but what if your home's just gone? Let's talk about that real quick, okay? All right. The RDNA2 provides an insight into where the most damage has occurred, referring to Ukraine. Housing, for example, is estimated to have sustained the greatest damage at $50 billion, followed by transport at $36 billion. Damage to energy and extractives infrastructure is estimated at $11 billion. So $50 billion of damage. The most damage by far is housing related. That's a lot of housing to suddenly lose access to. And this is from December 18th. Like, this is from today, okay? Huge amounts of housing are just gone, okay? And that number, at least at some point here in the conflict, because this is an article from today as well, seems to be at about 100 and all right, right here. The Kiev School of Economics report October 2023. Oh, come on, just let me highlight the part I want. There we go. There we go. Estimates the damage to Ukraine's infrastructure to be $151.2 billion. 167,200 housing units have been destroyed or damaged together with 18 airports and at least 344 bridges and over 25,000 kilometers of roads. So, a few things to take away from this, okay? Your house might not exist. You might not have a choice. Your house might go bye-byes. Be aware of that, okay? It seems to be a common occurrence in any of these war zones that homes disappear. Secondly, airports are gone. You're not flying anywhere. Thirdly, bridges are being destroyed and roads are being destroyed as well. Your travel plans, your bug out plans have to be able to account for these possibilities. You need routes, you need backup routes, and then you need backup routes. And that's because if the bridge that you were planning on having to cross to get where you need to go is gone, what are you going to do next? If your road that you're planning to take in order to get out of Dodge is destroyed, which way can you go now? So these are things that we get wrong in the sense of assuming we'll have access to these routes, or assuming we'll be able to cross a bridge, or assuming our house will still be there. We have to stop assuming that everything's going to maintain at least some level of accessibility during an SHTF event. These people are missing 25,000 kilometers of road. How much road do you need to get to where you're going, and how many major roadways are you planning on taking? And if you're smart enough to have your back road systems already figured out for how you'll get there if those major roadways are taken down, well, that's good for you. But then also, how many of those back roads are actually, near a strategic asset, or possibly relying on a bridge of some kind at some point to get you across? I used to live in a rural part of California where you wouldn't think anybody would be in that area depending on the scenario, but I did have to rely on some bridges to get where I had to go often. And if any of those bridges went down, what's next? So keep this in mind, because this is how things are looking in Ukraine right now, which means it's very likely we could see that happening here. Now, another thing we tend to get wrong, okay? James Mines, most dangerous thing in a grid down is your neighbors, especially the ones that know your prep. Well, I don't know about that completely, James Mines, and here's what I'm going to tell you about that. If you know your neighbors and you plan with your neighbors and you have level of organization with your neighbors and a level of rapport with your neighbors, communities still tend to come together during emergency events, especially a known one. So I know my neighbors know me, they're aware of what I do, but they're also doing their own stuff too, which means I don't think they're going to have to rely on me for anything. In fact, most of them are much better established than I am. But I had to make the effort to interact with my neighbors. And luckily, I have one neighbor who was willing to come interact with me to introduce himself, right? So having that network and that community is important. And if we maintain the idea that our neighbors are the most dangerous people, then we'll never build that community or build that camaraderie with our neighbors, which means they will be the most dangerous people because who the heck are you? The random creepy guy down the street who never comes outside, right? So, because I used to be that guy. I know how that works. Let's see here. P. Fletch, how many people have utility class ATVs as a mean of alternate transport for themselves and their gear? Probably not enough people, myself included. I don't have a good ATV or anything like that right now. But I'm leaning more towards donkey and a cart. So maybe that's just how I roll. It's probably because I've been shooting my AK a lot lately. So for some reason, the donkey cart thing is really starting to, look, appetizing to me. I don't know why. I don't think it has anything to do with that, actually. Anyway, here's another thing we get wrong as preppers. Ukraine fuel stations face LPG shortages as Polish supplies blocked. What does this mean? Okay, well, it's probably not exactly face value, or at least what you're thinking. Okay. Yardbird says Magic and his ilk are some dangerous dudes. I don't know about dangerous, but I think I live in a good neighborhood, let's just say. All right? And let's see here. That's okay. Pray for peace. We all are crazy here. We're all preppers, so that's got to tell you something, right? Here's what I want to take away from this concept. November 24th, okay? The ongoing blockade of Ukrainian border crossings by Polish drivers has led to a sharp drop in deliveries of motor vehicle gas to Ukrainian petrol stations, many of which are experiencing fuel shortages, analysts said on Friday. Around 1 million Ukrainian cars use LPG as a cheaper alternative to petrol. Farmers and households use the fuel for drying grain and heating homes, and Ukraine consumed about 1.1 million metric tons of LPG in 2022. Why am I talking about this? Well, it's 2023, and Ukraine, who's been in a war for basically 2 years now, okay, is facing LPG shortages. One thing we get wrong, and this goes back to the transportation thing, is the idea that there won't be vehicles, ever, right? Like the SHTF means there's no cars. But from people who have been to Ukraine that I've talked to, and from obviously news reports and everything else that's going on there right now, people still drive their car. People still have gas. So Ukraine's in a war, attacked by a superpower, and in full-blown SHTF, but people are just driving around still. There's still gas. Though there's some shortages now, 2 years later, but they can get in their car and go somewhere. So, like I said, Gaza is like one type of SHTF in a certain part of the world, aka a certain environment regarding the poverty level as well as the actual area itself. And then Ukraine is in another part of the world in an SHTF event with a different lifestyle and a different type of society where even though they're in a war, they still have gas at the pump. You see what I'm saying? So one thing preppers get wrong is that SHTF means there won't be any cars. I see that a lot. There won't be any vehicles. There won't be. Well, in Gaza, that's true. But in Ukraine, it's not. And you have to be prepared for both of those things to happen. Cars can be a really good asset. Of course, we need them for logistics. We need trucks to keep running. We need to keep things moving forward. But it also means that bad people can get around much faster and much further. So you'll hear a lot of people say, when the city starts, pouring out, it's going to be a big problem once those people finally reach us. Well, if those people still have cars, they're going to reach you very quickly. So be aware of that. Be aware of the threat that motor vehicles will possess and also be aware of the benefit and utility of having your vehicle during an SHTF event. The guys who are running around in Ukraine right now, at least some of the volunteers and stuff, like they take cars everywhere they go. Like no one's walking around. Like they're driving from one place to the next. Like no one, it's not an EMP. It's not Mad Max. They're driving cars, right? And I mean, even in Mad Max, they're driving cars. So just keep that in mind. Motor vehicles and modes of transportation related to motor vehicles are part of the game at this point. And I think it would be a cataclysmic event for them to disappear more so than a given or more so than something that's a guarantee. So that's just something I think preppers tend to get wrong. We think there won't be vehicles no matter what because that's what Hollywood has portrayed the apocalypse as generally. But I think there's a good chance you'll see motor vehicle use even if fuel is tight or even if it's hard to get supplies. Especially, I mean, the military is going to have access to it, right? But for even the standard civilians in Kiev, people are going to work. People are working their day job. They're going to their IT job, right, at a call center. Like, this is still happening for them, and they're still paying bills. So just keep that in mind. Now, R. Jones, poverty, you mean all their stuff is destroyed. I was talking about before all this stuff even happened. It's an impoverished area that's experiencing SHTF versus a less impoverished area that's experiencing SHTF. However, here's an interesting one. I thought that this would be, I don't know, something for you to keep in mind as well. Ukraine's largest telecom operator shut down after a cyber attack. Okay, this is from December 12th. This is a recent cyber attack that occurred. Ukraine's largest telecom operator, Kyivstar, got hit by a major cyber attack on Tuesday, leaving millions of people without cell service and internet. So Ukraine's been at war for almost 2 years now, and they still have cell service and internet. If the U.S. was at war and we were under attack here on our land, which I know is unlikely, but we can talk about these things. It's not going to hurt your pride to conceptualize these things, right? If we're at war, there's a chance we're going to have phones and internet still. Now, I mean, would it be dangerous to use a phone depending on what side of the war you're on, I guess? But what I'm trying to say is that Ukraine's demonstrating that even throughout a conflict zone and throughout an invasion, that they still have cell phones. They still have internet access. Like these things are still there. I'm not saying you should rely on them. I'm not saying you should plan on them to be there still. I think that would be a bad idea in all honesty. But I think you should plan on the possibility that they'll still exist, which means you should plan on how you would leverage it, how you would keep safe from prying eyes, and how it would be used by everyone else, aka, I don't know, propagandists from the collaborators? Who knows? But this is just showing that they're still running cell phone service and internet. Now, they're getting cyber attacks, which is shutting it down. But here's another thing that I thought was interesting that I thought you should keep in mind and that you might want to consider, okay? Ukrainians look for new SIMs. Oh. Many Ukrainians chose to switch mobile carriers on Tuesday rather than wait for Kyivstar services to return. Ukraine has 3 major telecom operators. Kyivstar with 24 million subscribers, Vodafone with 19 million, and LifeCell with 8.5 million. Switching to another operator in Ukraine is easy. No contract is needed, and it's relatively cheap. A prepaid SIM card costs about $5. In Ukraine's capital, Kiev, many people are lining up on Tuesday to buy SIM cards from Vodafone and LifeCell to stay connected. So that might not be the worst concept for a prepper. We all tend to look at technology as being worthless or unreasonable to consider during a preparedness conversation when we're talking about SHTF, right? Like everyone's like, oh, your phone's not going to work, or it's a death trap, and you're not going to have internet. So you need to have this and this and this and this because those things just aren't going to work. But in Ukraine right now, they have cell phones and they're buying other SIM cards so their cell phone will still work because the one company got cyber attacked. So we get it wrong, and myself included. We have this idea that all technology is going to become worthless in the immediacy of SHTF. And Ukraine is proving that to be a falsehood. And in fact, you might want to consider the idea of like another phone carrier, or like, a burner phone is a good idea, but something that uses a different carrier than your main cell phone, so that if a similar event were to occur, you would have a phone still, right? So, okay, you're on AT&T, major cyber attack, they get shut down. Well, I have a Verizon burner phone here, so I still have a phone now, right? Like, that's actually a good idea, in all honesty, especially because the cost is not that high if you were to buy just a cheap flip phone or something in order to have that access. So keep that in mind. I don't think that's a bad idea, and I also think it's kind of proving that cell phone and internet might still be a usable feature during SHTF. It's not immediate shut off of everything just because SHTF occurs. And look, I understand. If an internet blackout or an EMP happens, then that's a different conversation. But the more likely SHTF events we're going to see are the ones we're witnessing right now in real time in countries that are existing right this second. A foreign invasion or a foreign adversary wreaking havoc on a country. And we're watching it happen right now in Gaza. We're watching it happen right now in Ukraine. And it's teaching us a lot if you're willing to open your mind to some of these new ideas or these new perspectives in order to, adapt some of your preparedness plans. Let's see here. Mike H., can you discuss the predictive programming Civil War movie to be released in April during the private chat? Yeah, I'll give you some thoughts on that. If you want. Let's see here. Steven Sue. Shout out from San Jose, California. Thanks for all the entertaining content for the last 4 years. In and out on me if you ever visit California. Well, first off, thanks, Steven Sue. I really appreciate that. I can't believe it's been more than 4 years since I've been running this channel, which feels crazy. But I also will say that I miss In and Out quite a bit. Best fast food burger there is. I don't care what anyone says. And anyone from Texas that says what a burger to me right now, you're just wrong. You just haven't even had In and Out then. That's just my opinion. Anyway, and I do want to say, with how long I've been doing this for, you all are extremely appreciated. Thank you so much for supporting what I do here, and it's just been a crazy ride. And I'm going to keep it going because it's important. I hope I'm helping people get prepared. I hope I'm just giving you something to think about. A lot of the videos I put out are philosophical, thought-provoking videos in a way because I just want you to challenge your mindset. Even if you're still right at the end of the conversation, at least you were challenged by something, right? That's why some of the things I say might be offensive even, or people, might take the wrong way or feel targeted by it. But how else do you have a good, honest conversation? If everybody's happy about everything you said, then are you really saying everything you want to say, or are you being truthful about everything you're talking about? You're gonna have to make somebody upset if you're gonna say what you actually believe, right? That's just how life works, and that's why we need standards in the world, because without them, then we agree to just about everything, don't we? And here we are in 2023 America. Now, let's see here. Separate Spectre. Ernest Hemingway said about the way you go bankrupt. 2 ways, gradually at first and suddenly. SHTF also rarely happens all at once to Ukraine. Right, 100%. Now, it can happen very fast, a.k.a. Gaza, right? Mike H., thank you so much. I appreciate it. By the way, Northern Girl Hobbies, thanks for modding. Thanks for being here tonight. Really appreciate your help with that. But honestly, Gaza is like immediate SHTF in a way, right? In 2 months, they've gone from just doing their thing, which wasn't that great to begin with, but it was what they had. They still had lives, right? To now they don't have those same lives anymore. They're displaced. They don't have homes. They don't have jobs. They can't go to school. They went from 0 to 60. Ukraine is definitely the slower version of that. The slow escalation of, okay, well, we lost some land. We have a counteroffensive. We're still going to work. There's another missile strike. It's back and forth, right? So you got to be prepared for both because either one can happen, which is crazy, right? I'm going to heart that, Mike. There you go. I didn't even know I could do that, to be honest. Hey, I'm going to get all little hearts. There we go. Now we're doing something. Look at me. I actually know how YouTube works. All right. So, NC Farmer, thank you for your time, too. I really appreciate it. Now, here's something that I thought we should keep in mind, too. We know that enemies are going to destroy infrastructure. We know that infrastructure is already under attack. China has all their sleeper cell technology, their codes stashed away inside of our critical infrastructure software. We know it, right? Killware, malware, all the stuff that they have planted into our systems over the years is there and ready to be used at any moment, okay? But something that we have to keep in mind is that even though Ukraine is in a war right now, they're continually working to keep things up and running. They're continually working to get infrastructure back online. They are not, giving up. They want to keep things moving forward in that sense. So, Ukraine is trying to keep its lights on this winter. Russia aims to turn them off December 13th, 2023. Okay, I just want to show you guys this, to be honest. These are electrical, workers. I'm not sure what they are. I'm not going to call them engineers or electricians or whatever. All I know is they work for the power company, and these dudes are climbing up on power poles, fixing electrical issues while wearing flak jackets. They're wearing plate carriers, or at the very minimum, Kevlar vests to go do their job because they still need to get the power up and running. And this might be the difference of a place like Ukraine versus Gaza. The people of Ukraine need this to maintain, or else it will be pure chaos. The people of Gaza are more accustomed to a more primitive lifestyle. They can handle the idea of animal-drawn carts, of no power, of dealing with the fact that they have 23 people in a tent, right? Like, I'm not saying that they want to live that way. I'm not saying that they should live that way. What I'm saying is that they're more accustomed to adversity. They're more accustomed to living in a more difficult situation. People in Ukraine are a little more accustomed to first world comforts. And so if they don't keep the power on, people lose their lives, they lose their minds, and things get even worse than they already are. So they're doing what they have to do. Utility repairman Valery Moscat steps to the side as an armored personnel carrier roars by, loaded with soldiers headed to a nearby front. We do our work, they do theirs, but we're working for the same thing, says Moscat, who works for DTEK, Ukraine's largest private energy company, bringing normal life back to Ukraine. That's their goal. Since the end of last winter, Ukrainian utility workers and power operators have been racing to brace the country's energy system against another winter of expected Russian attacks. Transmission lines have been restrung, power plants patched, electrical substations surrounded with sandbags. Operationally, in terms of experience, we are much better prepared than we were last year, says Vladimir Kudrytsky, Chief Executive Officer of Ukrenegro, which operates Ukraine's electrical grid. My tongue is not keeping up with me tonight. Unfortunately, it is impossible to recover all of the assets that have been destroyed. Okay, but I mean, these are electrical workers wearing plate carriers, wearing flak jackets like that. This is what it will look like in the United States, in my opinion. If we have the same situation happen here, we're going to be out there trying to get the power back on. We're going to be out there trying to rerun lines. We're going to be out there wearing plate carriers in scissor lifts, trying to make sure the new transformer gets installed. Like, we got to keep it up and running just like Ukraine, or else the entire country devolves into chaos. So the expectation isn't that you should expect electricity to work or that you should expect it, but one thing we might be wrong about is the response to it, or the dedication to avoiding a total collapse of said infrastructure and power grid. Because the powers that be also know what that alludes to, which is mass chaos, confusion, and eventually the downfall of a country, right? So that is what I wanted to talk about tonight. The things that I feel like we've gotten wrong based on the examples that we have access to now. We have two examples occurring right now in the world, Gaza and Ukraine, and regardless of the politics or anything else surrounding those two scenarios, the innocent people who are in those places that are suffering through this are dealing with those things in the best way they can, and we can see what they're doing in order to deal with it and understand that that is a situation we may eventually find ourselves in, depending on what happens. And if that's the case, now we know, okay, you might need to be on foot. You might need to figure out alternative transportation. You might need to leave your home because it's completely destroyed. Things can be very dangerous. So, listen, I really want you to know that the goal of this channel is to help you prepare, whether or not it's mentally or strategically. And it's not always about buying gear, or buying food, or learning how to raise cattle or anything like that. Sometimes I'm just trying to give you considerations to make so that when you are planning those types of things, whether or not it's gear or food or livestock or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, whether or not it's buying a property or whatever, you have to account for all these different concepts into that strategic planning so that you can create the best plan possible, right? So without that information, it's hard to do that. And that's why we have these discussions. It's not about, trying to create fear. It's not about trying to stir a panic. It's about evaluating the scenario that's occurring right now in front of us and then using it to our advantage as best we can in order to be as prepared as we can. So, this is probably the last live stream for the year. If you're here on the replay, thank you so much, replay crew. for the win every time you guys come through and watch this live stream the next day or later tonight or whatever it is. And I really appreciate that because I appreciate that you value the information, and I also appreciate the support. If you guys want to give me the thumbs up to close this thing out tonight in order to get past the algorithmic overlords, I would appreciate that too, because the channel can always use that boost, So make sure you subscribed. Make sure you check in over the next couple of weeks. I'll have some really cool content coming out, but no more live streams for the rest of 2023. Thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Michael Triptow says, well thought out. I hope everything you do in life is well thought out, and I hope that I can provide you with well thought out information. That's the best I can offer. So, Rip Curl Readiness, thanks for being here. Thank you for modding tonight. I appreciate you all. I really, really do. Enjoy your Christmas. Merry Christmas to all of you. Have a happy New Year. And besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper.